There's something really delightful when you see little pops of blue scattered up through a flower bed, and you know that it's forget-me-nots just coming into bloom, normally blooming in around about April, May time. They really punctuate the border and give a little light spangle of fairy dust through a border. They're really charming and worth growing. So on the back of the seed packet you can see that forget-me-nots are what's called a biennial. That means that you sow them one year, they grow into a plant, and then they flower the following year. And all the instructions on the back of the seed packet say to sow them in the spring. I don't really think that's absolutely essential, because if you sow them in the spring, they'll probably flower in the autumn, to be honest. So as long as you sow them around summertime, late spring, summertime, that means that you'll have plants big enough to plant out that can sit in the ground ready to flower the following spring. So I've got two packets here. I've got one that's a mixed colour packet of seed with blues, pinks and whites in it, and then I've got a more traditional blue coloured variety here, which is traditionally what forget-me-nots are supposed to be like. So I'm going to sow these. I'm going to choose to sow them into these compressed paper modules. They are really good because they last long enough for the seeds to germinate, but then you can plant the whole thing out in the garden and the whole thing will decompose and rot away. And I filled it with a peat-free compost. I've taken most of the big lumps out of the peat-free compost because you can find that they get stuck, those great big chunks stick in the modules and leave cavities underneath, so it's a good idea to get rid of the biggest chunks. I'm just going to fill another one quickly, so I'm loosely filling it with the compost, not putting my fingers in and pressing in there. I'm going to strike off the excess quite roughly, like that, so I've got it roughly level. With forget-me-nots particularly, you don't need to be too fussy. They will do very well and germinate pretty quickly. They're an easy thing. Just tapping that just to consolidate the compost. So I've got two cellular trays there filled with compost ready to go, and what I'm going to do is take the seed from the little foil packet inner. So I'm just going to sprinkle the seeds into the palm of my hand. I'm going to sprinkle all of them in because we'll put quite a lot of seeds in each unit, and I'm going to put a little pinch of seed into each of these individual units, because the very act of actually watering them in will settle those seeds into the surface of the compost. So all we need to do is to get the watering can, get a good rose on the end of the watering can, and then sprinkle the water over the surface of the seeds just to water them in, get them really well soaked so that the pots are soaked as well, and those seedlings will pop up in around 3 to 4 weeks time, and then once they've developed into quite nice little plants, about 2, 3, 4 inches tall, you can actually plant them directly out in the garden in this unit, in these individual units where they'll grow for next year. In terms of where to grow forget-me-nots, really often you don't get much choice. The seeds are spread pretty liberally from the flowers. Once the flowers are finished, the seeds are widespread and chucked around all over the place. So you'll find them popping up all over the place in your garden too. And I've never really sown great quantities myself, just waited for them to naturally occur. So they pop up in lightly shaded spots and also in full sun, sometimes to the extent where you want to weed them out because there's too many of them. But it's not really too much of an effort because they're really so beautiful. But they'll grow on any soil, be it sandy, on heavy clay, on acid sand, or even on chalk. They're not that fussy. Once your forget-me-nots have flowered, you'll find that they end up with a long stalk with pretty much nothing on apart from little seed capsules that punctuate the stems all the way up, and those will spread liberal seeds all over the place once they've finished flowering. If you want them to self-seed, then let them do it. If you don't want them to set seed and you've got too many already, yank the plants out in handfuls, because these are biennial plants, and that means that they will flower, and once they've flowered they will die. They grow one year, flower the next, and then die. So take them out because they're not perennials, they won't come back year after year. You have to rely on the seeds sowing themselves to bring the plants back each year. Now, because they're really quick growing, easy to care for plants, they don't really suffer from too many problems apart from really chronic mildew. So once the plants have flowered, generally speaking, they get away with it up until they flower, but as soon as they flowered, they often turn into a horrible mess of powdery mildew, and that really makes the plants look horrible, and you'll want to take them out in any case. So there isn't really anything else. When it comes to planting, you'll probably find small pots of forget-me-nots for sale in garden centres or nurseries. But to be honest, if you've raised your own from seed and they've grown like mustard and cress like they normally do, then your little pots full can be planted directly out in the garden. And it generally, if you've sown them in the early part of the spring, you'll have them ready to plant out when the older plants are in full flower. So these plants will sit in the ground, carry on growing, bulking up, making big plants ready for next year. And it's simply a matter of taking your little baby seedlings, making sure that they're really well watered before you plant them out, because these pots on the outside need to be thoroughly soaked so that they will decompose in the ground. Remember that these are biodegradable paper pots. So I'm going to just plant out a few, 3 in this little triangle here, because they'll bulk up and fill this area. So I'm just taking out a hole big enough to accommodate my little pot full. Make sure that you get the whole pot in contact with the surrounding soil, and that little pot will give some protection to the little seedling while it develops. And remember that the pot is full of really good compost, so the roots will continue to develop out into the surrounding soil and grow through that pot and grow away. So they look a little bit vulnerable at this stage, but don't worry too much, they'll soon get established. Make sure that after you've planted, you water these really well so that the soil around each of these little individual pots remains completely saturated, so the pots can carry on rotting down and the roots can go through them. Now, once you've got forget-me-nots in your garden, you certainly won't forget them, because they will keep popping up here, there and everywhere. But one of the most joyous things, as well as their beautiful blue flowers, has got to be their Latin plant name, Myosotis, which refers to mouse's ear. And looking at the leaves at the base of the flowering stems, you can just see these little ears waiting to explode with flower.